They say you never truly know the weight of your voice until it becomes the last thing you leave behind. Some people write letters, some whisper prayers. But on September 11, 2001, one man left behind something far heavier. He left behind his voice, recorded in his final desperate 911 call, as the South Tower of the World Trade Center came crashing down. This is the story of Kevin Cosgrove, a husband, a father, a friend, and a man whose last words still echo, haunting millions who have heard them. On September 11, 2001, the world witnessed one of the darkest days in history. But within the chaos of collapsing towers and burning steel, one man's voice cut through the noise, a voice that still chills millions to this day. His name was Kevin Cosgrove, and his last call to 911 would become one of the most unforgettable recordings ever made. But before we relive that call, let's step back. Because to truly understand the power of Kevin's final words, we need to know who he was, what his life meant, and why his death still resonates with millions around the world. Kevin M. Cosgrove wasn't just a name in the history books. He was a real man, a father, a husband, a friend. Born in 1955, Kevin was 46 years old in 2001. He lived in West Islip, New York, with his wife Wendy and their 3 children. To his family and colleagues, Kevin wasn't just another executive in a high-rise office. He was a man of loyalty, humor, and deep devotion to the people around him. Professionally, Kevin worked as a vice president for Aon Corporation, a global insurance firm. His office was on the 105th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center, high above the streets of Manhattan, where on clear days the view stretched endlessly across the New York skyline. For Kevin, that office wasn't just a workplace, it was a place where he built his career, forged friendships, and provided for the family he loved so dearly. Outside of work, Kevin was known as a family man. He coached his children's sports, attended their school events, and was remembered as the kind of dad who never let his busy corporate life overshadow his role at home. He was dependable, steady, and strong, the type of man who gave people comfort just by being present. That is why his last call hits so deeply. Because when you hear his voice, desperate, trembling, but still fighting to hold on to life, you don't just hear a victim. You hear a husband wanting to return home, a father longing to see his children again, and a man realizing he may not survive. The morning of September 11, 2001, Tuesday, September 11th, began like any other day. The skies above New York City were clear, a crisp blue morning that gave no sign of the tragedy about to unfold. Kevin arrived at the South Tower for work as usual. His office, high above the city, was buzzing with activity. Meetings were being scheduled, phones were ringing, and employees were settling into another day of business. For Kevin, it was routine, another day in the fast-paced world of finance and insurance. At 8:46 a.m., the routine was shattered. A hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 11, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The explosion rocked the city, sending smoke and debris into the air. From Kevin's vantage point in the South Tower, the sight must have been overwhelming. The tower next door engulfed in flames, people screaming in the streets, chaos erupting in every direction. Inside the South Tower, confusion spread. Some announcements told workers to evacuate, while others insisted the building was secure and people should remain at their desks. Many, unsure of what to do, hesitated. Some left, others stayed. Kevin stayed. Maybe it was a belief that everything would be under control. Maybe it was loyalty to his colleagues, or maybe it was the false sense of security that officials tried to maintain. Either way, Kevin and countless others remained inside. Then, at 9:03 a.m., the nightmare grew worse. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 slammed directly into the South Tower. The building shook violently, windows shattered, walls buckled, and flames roared upward through the floors. Kevin's office, on the 105th floor, was now directly in the path of destruction. The once clear morning sky was now blackened with smoke. The air filled with dust, burning jet fuel, and chaos. Elevators were destroyed. Stairwells were blocked. The floors above the impact zone became sealed death traps. For Kevin and the others trapped with him, escape was no longer possible. They were cut off, stranded more than 100 stories in the air, as the world below them panicked and watched in horror. In those moments, people reacted in different ways. Some prayed, some broke windows to gasp for air. Others searched desperately for a path out. Kevin chose to pick up the phone. At 9:54 a.m., with smoke thickening and the building groaning under the weight of destruction, Kevin dialed 911. His voice, at first, was controlled but filled with urgency. He gave his location, described his situation, and pleaded for help. But beneath the surface of his words, you can hear it, the sound of a man realizing his fate may already be sealed. He told the operator, "We're young men, we're not ready to die." And with those words, Kevin Cosgrove's 911 call became etched into history. The clock ticked closer to 9:15 a.m. inside the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The initial chaos from the first impact had already spread throughout New York City, but for the thousands still trapped inside, the situation was only growing worse. Kevin Cosgrove, like many others on the upper floors, was cut off from the stairwells. The plane that had hit the South Tower on the 80th floor had created a wall of destruction, fire, and smoke that sealed off safe escape routes above it. Kevin and several of his co-workers found themselves stuck, high above Manhattan, with no way down. As the smoke thickened, the air became harder to breathe. Panic was in the air, but Kevin, a man known for his steady leadership, tried to remain calm. He urged his colleagues to gather by the windows where they might get cleaner air, but the view below was a nightmare, crowds of people fleeing, police and fire trucks racing in, and the distant sounds of chaos echoing from the streets. And then came the moment, the decision to call 911. It wasn't just about getting help anymore. It was about being heard. It was about making sure someone on the outside knew they were still alive. When Kevin connected to the 911 operator, his voice was steady but laced with fear. "My name is Kevin Cosgrove. I'm on the 105th floor. We're young men, we're not ready to die." These words cut through the dispatcher like a knife. Behind her headset, she had already answered dozens of desperate calls that morning, but there was something about Kevin's tone, controlled but breaking, that pierced her heart. On the recording, his breathing is heavy. You can hear muffled voices in the background, two colleagues with him, urging each other to stay calm, to hold on, to wait for rescue. They believed firefighters would reach them. They believed there was still a chance. The dispatcher reassured him, telling him to stay on the line, to stay calm. She promised help was coming. But deep down, she likely knew the impossible odds. There were no viable escape routes from that height, not with the flames raging below. Kevin's call was more than just words, it was a window into his internal struggle. At times, he spoke firmly, as though willing himself to stay composed. Other times, his voice cracked. He mentioned his wife, his children, the life he wasn't ready to lose. He wasn't a faceless victim. He was a father, a husband, a man who still believed someone could reach him. "We're not ready to die," he repeated, almost as if saying it enough times could stop what was coming. The operator, miles away, felt powerless. Her training told her to reassure, to calm, to buy time. But how do you buy time when the minutes are slipping away so fast? The background noise of the call grows louder, metal creaking, alarms sounding, the faint crackle of fire. At one point, Kevin seems to choke on the smoke. He coughs, catches his breath, and you can hear him trying to shield his mouth, muffling his words with cloth. Every detail of that call made listeners years later shiver. It wasn't just a man calling for help. It was a man calling for life itself. As the call continues, the outside world is unaware that the South Tower has only minutes left. Kevin doesn't know it, the operator doesn't know it, but history does. The tower's collapse is imminent. Kevin tries to sound brave. He keeps speaking to the dispatcher, not letting silence win. But underneath, his words reveal his rising terror. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." These are words no human should ever have to repeat, yet here they were, echoing through a phone line, captured forever. At one point, you can hear him trying to calm the others in the room. He tells them they'll make it out, that help is on the way. His leadership instinct never left him, even in his final minutes. But the reality was inescapable. The room was filling with smoke, the structure groaned around them, and the seconds ticked away. And then it happened. At 9:59 a.m., just 56 minutes after the plane struck the South Tower, the unimaginable began. On the recording, the sound shifts. There's a thunderous roar, a rumbling like the earth itself is tearing apart. Kevin's voice rises sharply. Panic surges through every word. "Oh God, oh." And then silence. The South Tower collapsed, floor upon floor pancaking into the ground, taking Kevin, his colleagues, and thousands of others with it. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher could only listen as the sound of humanity's worst nightmare unfolded in her headset. She called his name, but there was nothing. Just static. Just silence. What makes Kevin's 911 call one of the most infamous in history is not just the tragedy of his final words, but the way it forces listeners to confront the raw, unfiltered terror of that day. When the call was later released during the Zacarias Moussaoui trial, the world heard what no one was prepared to hear, the intimate, heartbreaking last moments of a man who wanted nothing more than to live. Kevin's words live on not because of their horror, but because they humanize the incomprehensible. In that moment, the statistics of 9/11 became flesh and blood. He wasn't just a number in the death toll. He was a voice, a father, a husband, and a man who fought against the inevitable with nothing but his will to survive. When the South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m., it was more than a building falling. It was thousands of lives extinguished in seconds, each one a story cut short. For the families of those trapped, hope ended in a cloud of dust and debris that blanketed Manhattan. Among those lost was Kevin Cosgrove, a man whose final words would echo long after the towers were gone. In the chaotic weeks that followed, Ground Zero became both a rescue site and a graveyard. Thousands of firefighters, police officers, and volunteers dug through twisted steel and ash, desperately searching for survivors. But for families like Kevin's, the weight was unbearable. It wasn't until September 2001 that fragments of his remains were eventually recovered. For his family, there was no comfort, only the hollow closure that came with knowing he would never come home. His wife and children were left to pick up the pieces of a life stolen by terror. But even as the world mourned, Kevin's voice was already on its way to becoming immortalized. Unknown to his family at first, the 911 call he made in those final minutes had been recorded, preserved, and locked away as evidence. Years later, during the 2006 trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, prosecutors made a controversial choice. They played Kevin Cosgrove's 911 call for the courtroom. The moment was devastating. Jurors sat frozen as Kevin's trembling voice filled the room. Reporters described people weeping openly, their faces pale with shock. Even hardened law enforcement officials who had spent years investigating 9/11 broke down in tears. Why did they play it? Because the call wasn't just evidence of what happened inside the towers, it was proof of the human cost of terrorism. The prosecution wanted the jury, and by extension the world, to feel the pain of that day, to understand the true weight of the loss. And it worked. Kevin's voice became one of the trial's most haunting reminders of the stakes involved. His desperation, his plea for life, his last words, "Oh God, oh," were etched into history, not as a statistic but as a living, breathing human moment captured forever. For the American public, Kevin's call represented something deeper. It wasn't just another tragic story, it was the sound of innocence colliding with terror. Every person who listened could imagine themselves in his shoes, making that final phone call, hoping for rescue that never came. In the years since, countless documentaries, news specials, and tributes have referenced Kevin's call. It has been studied, analyzed, and remembered, not out of morbid fascination, but because it symbolizes the raw humanity of 9/11. Even today, when Americans gather for September 11th memorial services, his name is read aloud, along with every other victim. His family attends those ceremonies, and each time, the memory of his voice reminds them, and the world, of what was stolen that day. What sets Kevin's story apart is not only that it was captured on tape, but how it continues to resonate. His plea, "We're young men, we're not ready to die," has become a phrase that echoes through the years, a universal cry for life against impossible odds. For many, listening to his call is unbearable. For others, it's a way to keep the memory of 9/11 real, personal, and human. His story is taught in classrooms, shared in documentaries, and revisited every anniversary, not because people enjoy the horror, but because it forces us to remember the value of life and the cruelty of terrorism. His children grew up without their father. His wife had to endure the pain of not only losing him but also hearing the public replay his final words. Yet, despite the agony, they supported the world knowing his call stood as a testament to the truth, that those inside the towers were living, breathing people with families, dreams, and futures, all cut short in an instant. Today, more than 2 decades later, Kevin Cosgrove's 911 call remains one of the most chilling recordings ever released. It is painful, heartbreaking, and unforgettable, but it also ensures that he, and those who perished alongside him, are never forgotten. The call is not just a historical artifact, it is a reminder. A reminder of vulnerability, a reminder of courage. And above all, a reminder of the cost of hatred and terror. As the years pass, many details of 9/11 may blur in memory, but Kevin's voice keeps the story alive. His words, desperate yet human, carry across generations, ensuring that what happened that day is never reduced to a line in a history book. In the end, Kevin Cosgrove didn't survive, but his voice did. And in that voice, the world hears not just the story of one man, but the echo of thousands, all gone too soon. Stories chill us because they are fiction. But this one chills us because it is real. Kevin Cosgrove's final words are more than just a haunting echo from the South Tower, they are a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly everything can change, and how deeply one voice can move the world. If this story touched you tonight, don't forget to take a moment to reflect, to remember, and to honor not just Kevin, but the thousands of lives lost on September 11th. And if you want to hear more stories that are as real as they are unforgettable, subscribe now, and join me as we continue to uncover the voices that still whisper from the shadows of history.